Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you the top 10 best underwater arc tames, so let's get straight into it, shall we? In at number 10 we have got the Mosasaurus, and I'm putting this thing here because really in today's age it isn't the height of underwater travel like it used to be. The Mosasaurus is in some need of some TLC. It does lack a lot of inventiveness in its abilities, but it still is going to be a good underwater tame, and it's deserving of the list. The Plesiosaur is just slightly outside the bracket, so that creature is not making the list today, but the Mosasaurus just manages to squeeze in. It's not my favorite underwater tame by any means, but you can definitely get around on it quite easily, and there's a lot of good mobility and motion that you can get out of this creature. Like, you're still going to use a Wyvern even though they've got a bad turning circle because they're great flyers. It's kind of similar with this thing, but it's not quite the same because they aren't really as good as something like a Wyvern. A Wyvern is a much better creature, but Wyverns can't go underwater, so that's besides the point really. So next up we have got the Ichthyosaurus. I was going to consider putting the Tuso in this spot as well. I don't really use it much as an underwater creature, but I guess I'll give it a brief honourable mention here because it still is quite a nice underwater tame, but it didn't make it on the list quite for me. But still, you know, it has good mobility and it is also quite a nice dealer of damage. The Ichthyosaurus, however, is just a speed demon when it comes to underwater travel. Yes, maybe not the fastest underwater creature we've got on our list today, but still one that can really get around, and most things won't be able to keep up with this thing whatsoever, which is why I like this as an underwater tame. Although it's not really going to be great for any kind of attacking or heavy damage dealing, that's really not what it's here for, especially considering it is a passive tame. It is one of the easiest creatures to tame on the list today, so it is definitely very deserving of this place, as considering how easy this thing is to tame, and also just generally how much travel and mobility you can get out of this creature. It is insane, and in my opinion, because of this, I'm putting them above the Mosasaur, because the Mosasaur really does need some TLC, like I mentioned before, whereas this is not really in any need of TLC. It's very good how it is, and it is so much easier to tame and so much more worthwhile. Coming up next, we have got the Megalodon, and this is one of those tames where I think they're actually quite underrated. Yes, it's not going to be the best underwater tame in existence. There are some creatures which I would definitely prefer over this, but I feel like considering how long it's been around for and actually what abilities it still holds, it is a very viable option. Maybe not for PvP, as that does tend to be quite a different world, and there are very specific tames that you'll be using for most of the time. At least that's my understanding overall. The Megalodon doesn't really come to too much play in that, but underwater creatures don't really anyway. And with this creature dealing the bleed ability, that is something which I really do hold home for PvE players, as it really does make a huge difference. It does for PvP as well, but again, it's not really relevant in that scene, at least as far as I'm concerned. The bleed ability just allows a new dimension of damage to be dealt with this creature, and on top of it, it is pretty mobile, and it just makes it a nice, relatively small creature for defeating the Moda on Gen 1, especially considering you've got the X variants of these creatures and just general little fighting machines. In at number 7, we have got the Basilosaurus, and come on, this creature is definitely deserving of a spot on the list. It is small, relatively compact, and it is a dream in underwater scenarios. The speed that you can get out of this thing is absurd, and also the fact that it doesn't necessarily spawn in the water off the get-go means that it could potentially be easier for you to tame. The only real downside with that in this argument is that they do spawn in the swamp, but as long as you can find one that's, you know, more on the outskirts and still a reasonably high level, you're going to have a good time. Even lower level ones are still going to have that same speed. They're just going to sacrifice a lot on weight and health and some other important things that you might need in the ocean biome, because there are some pretty deadly creatures out there, and you know, it's a pretty harsh environment, so I would definitely be careful if you're on a lower level mount. They also are just insane cementing paste gatherers. It's not really going to make a huge difference for underwater travel, although you can just farm trilobites with these things, and that is my all-time favourite way to get cementing paste with these creatures. It's just the go-to for me, and I really love it for its speed, its overall general agility, and just being a relatively easy tame to get. Just an all-round great tame. Now, we all know the Maywing is great when it comes to general mobility. It pretty much tops every list that you could possibly put it on in that genre. Well, it really does do a great job as an underwater tame, and most people don't expect it. First, it can glide across the top of the surface of the water, and I find that to be quite an effective, useful ability, escaping danger that may be in the depths. And I know usually they don't come up all the way, but if you've got some jellyfish or some electric eels, yes, they can still shock you while on the surface, but you can get away much quicker. They also are just really fast swimmers as well. You probably wouldn't expect it out of these creatures, but trust me, they can definitely go for it, and you'll not be let down by the speed and agility and just general mobility that you get out of these things in any environment, that being underwater or not, which is why I'm putting them so highly on the list as well, because they're not only the best underwater tame really that could fit in this spot on the list, obviously not the best underwater tame out there because there's still 5 more creatures to go, but they're just so great in their ability to be great in the water and then great on the land as well. There's just a lot of versatility with these creatures, and hence why they're so high on the list, because you might say the Meg or the Beals is just a better underwater mount, but with the versatility, this is doing much better. In at number 5, we've got the Managarmr, and I feel like a lot of people forget that this is sort of an underwater creature. I know you probably wouldn't use it for that. It is an insanely great mount for general PvP use. It can wreck bases, and although its health can be pretty temperamental in some scenarios, it has been proven to be highly successful in that environment. Also, just from a PvE perspective, they are great for picking up a wealth of creatures of huge sizes like Rexes and Paraceratheriums. They also have a lot of speed and a lot of weight, so it makes them really amazing for metal gathering. It's just such a nice thing to have. Yes, we all know and love the RG, but the Rhynio in a lot of cases is just generally the nicer creature to use, and it is an insanely great fast swimmer. If you've ever taken this thing into the water, then you'll know you can still get a lot of speed and agility with this thing, and you still have all those abilities and heavy damage dealing that the Rhynio obviously has. I'm not sure if it has oxygen or not. I think it would, considering what it is. Well, it does have an oxygen stat, obviously, so you probably have to be a little bit careful with that. I haven't been in the underwater environment for too long with this thing. I've just merely gone to skim down to some caves and things, so I haven't really paid attention to it. But again, that's something which you're probably going to want to pay attention to. And their tame method is something which you could consider quite exciting as well, which adds to the creature being so good. I don't know what it is, but with me, if they have an exciting tame method and the creature has an exciting tame method, then it really makes them even more fun to use once they've tamed, especially if it's like a lengthy process. It's not too difficult really for the Managarmr. It's way easier to turn like the Reaper, although it kind of follows the same tame method because it impregnates a dino of your choice. Choose a Bronto really. I think it's the best one out there, I think, for effectiveness reasons, something like that. It's way easier when it's not you and it's a creature, and then you have to get all those resources instead of the XP which you get from the Reaper, which I don't think is as good of a system, but you know, still, honestly, it's not the hardest tame in the world, especially if you prepare, and it's still a pretty cool one, and I think it just adds to the general ambience of this creature on top of everything it already does. So continuing on, we've got the Spinosaurus, and it is no doubt that the Spino is a really great underwater creature. I'm going to give the Barry a brief mention here, as I haven't actually put the Baryonyx on the list, but I would put it around this spot as well. I just think the Spino is the superior underwater creature just generally. This thing has more speed than the Barry, and obviously it has the added damage, and it's still really agile too. And considering the underwater cave entrances and underwater caves are so massive on the island anyway, you're not going to struggle to get a Spino down and in there. It is ridiculously easy, and you're a heavy damage dealer. You just need to be careful of obviously all the jellyfish and the electric eels, and the oxygen which comes with the Spino as well. They're your only real downsides, but just considering how mobile this creature is and versatile again, like the Maywing, it's a better underwater creature than the Maywing, by the way, because of just all the added damage and defense, which is something the Maywing lacks in. It is just such a versatile general travel mount as well. It's great on the land, it's great for boss fights, it's just great for going around the map, obviously being a nice travel mount, and it can deal hefty amounts of damage, especially considering it can stand up on its hind legs ever since the TLC, which is just a nice, neat ability for it to have. And on top of that, which I haven't even mentioned yet, which I probably should have earlier, they have the hydration buff too, so when they're in the water they deal even more damage and just have an even better buff applied to them when they're in the environment, so it's going to make them even more powerful and even more formidable to all other things that will be in the ocean trying to get into your way. But really, do be careful of the electric eels and jellyfish. You might underestimate them, but if you get yourself caught in a stun lock, it's not going to be a good time for you or your Spino. But apart from that, really, gold star creature deserves to be here. In at number 3, we've got the Basilosaurus. Come on, it does need to be here. Its immunity to electric eels and jellyfish is really something insane. Should I give an honorable mention to the Basilosaurus as well, as I've heard that has the same ability. I haven't tested it enough to warrant it being on the list, but actually I do want you to comment down below, if you use the Basilosaurus in underwater environment, how does that actually act? Because I want to know, and actually I will test it out throughout the week, because I'm playing around with some of the new creatures more. But yeah, comment that down below if there's something which I definitely like to know. The Basilo is really an ideal caving creature though, although yes, it does have that depth limit which you need to be careful of. The immunity to electric eels and jellyfish, and also just general speed, make it ideal for the job. Also, I'm pretty confident it doesn't have an oxygen stat as well. They can jump to and make little rainbows if that's your thing as well. They can also make oil on top of this, so if you want some slow oil farms, it's really not the fastest thing in the world, then you can have the Bass on your side, and obviously the X-Basilar is on Gen 1 if you want an even better version. Next up, we've got the Shadowmane, and I have to put this creature here because in my opinion it is really one of those good ones. It has the hydration buff from a start like the Spino, but it is much smaller and in my opinion much more agile, and it still does all of that heavy dealing damage. On top of this as well, it does have a pack buff, so if you're going down with some friends or you just bring some more along with you, then you can have an even bigger advantage in underwater environments. I'm pretty sure they do have an oxygen buff though, so be careful with that. They have natural armor and require no saddle, so that's an even bigger benefit. Less resources to get these things, and also just, come on, these creatures really do pack a punch. I probably said it earlier because it just needs to be mentioned really. Come on, they deal so much damage, they're so fast and agile in the water, packed with abilities, they have that hydration buff, so they're going to be great for underwater caving, great for underwater bosses, and great for anything that you might want to do in an underwater environment in Ark, and that is why they deserve to be in the number 2 spot in my opinion. So let's get on to the creature that actually tops the list today. In number 1, I have put the Bloodstalker. It was there the last time I think I did one of these videos, but I've obviously updated the list a bit more now, and I will continue to update my list as obviously the channel goes forward. But this is still topping the list of the best underwater mounts out there. It is just so agile on land and in water. It really does add to the versatility of this creature. You can also see all the aggros of the Tames around you, so you can see what creature to aggro to easily evade danger before it even comes near to you, and they are zippingly fast in an underwater environment. Although maybe they don't have the damage capacity to defeat bosses, they still have the damage available to easily kill quite a lot of creatures around them. You'd be surprised how much damage a Bloodstalker can actually deal if you really put them to work in a scenario like this. If you get a good Bloodstalker, you're going to be having a good time with that good mobility, good damage, and great versatility, as you don't need to simply cry out your creature or something like that when you hop out of the water. You can just keep traveling around the map with these things, and obviously they're just useful for general travel and just around the map. They are nice companions to have too. They really are very, very versatile. Tames, this was a versatility list, they would definitely be up there. The only thing obviously they lack is you're not going to be killing any moders with these things, and they don't have any upgraded variants like some of the creatures that I've mentioned on the list, but they're already so good and just so overpowered in my opinion that I think they deserve the #1 spot. But comment down below your thoughts if you feel like maybe there should be another creature in at the #1 spot, and actually what is your favourite underwater mount out there. In at number 10 we've got the Crystal Wyvern, and you could say just the regular Wyvern as well. It's just I kind of have a preference for Crystal Wyverns, so I'm just going to put them on the list instead of the normal Wyverns. But you know, if you don't really like the Crystal Wyverns for whatever reason, then normal Wyverns it is. And actually it is a very well known fact that Wyverns are pretty much the fastest land flyers out there. These things have insane agility when it comes to actual just flying, gliding not included, even though there are obviously a lot of gliders in this list and that does count as a more speedy tame. But in the sake of just flying around, these things are actually pretty speedy when it comes to it for obviously that main flying. They're faster than the Pteranodon and a Tapijara of course, and way faster than something like the Quetzal. That is an insanely slow creature. And even though you can't level up movement speed anymore for flyers without obviously enabling flyer speed leveling or with the classic flyers mod, obviously those two options accessible on single player only unless you're a host of a server, these things are still going to offer a great amount of speed, and you're really not going to be worrying about the speed of these things, considering that they are definitely some really fast tames, and considering how easy the Crystal Wyverns are, they are a really great option for your first flyer on Crystal Isles. Next up we've got the Rhynio, and this is definitely one of the newer flyers which has been added into Ark, but it definitely does need to be put on this list for many reasons, namely because of the speed. Actually there's not really many reasons, it's speedy. That is how the Rhynio works. And if you didn't know already, it spawns on the island and the Lost Island. There are your only two maps and your only options. On ASA as well, just as a little bonus, they are nowhere near as rare to find unless obviously you're playing on the normal version of Ark. Then, well, I can't really say normal, they're both normal, but the old version of Ark has a much rarer Rhynio spawn than the new one, and actually it seems a bit like an overspawn for the new one. There just seems to be Rhynio everywhere, but you can always raise your dino count, use the destroy wild dinos command if you want to tame yourself a Rhynio on the older version of Ark and you're on a single player world, and you have access to those commands of course. But how do you actually tame one of these things as well? And this is the only creature on this list which I'm really going to talk about its tame method in great detail because it's quite a difficult one. In terms of what you do, you kill a male Rhynio to get that pheromone, then tame yourself a Bronto or equivalent creatures that work. Bronto's the best. Get all those resources on screen, not necessary of course, only optional. You only need them if you want 100% effectiveness, and for these things I don't really think it matters all too much. Then you'll want to trap your Rhynio and damage it as much as you can. Obviously don't kill it, that would be absolutely awful and a huge waste of time in actually trapping the creature and just the creature itself, especially on the old version of Ark, considering how rare these things actually are on that version of the game. And you may need to give it some additional hits as well, because these things do actually heal ridiculously quick. Then you want to feed that pheromone gland to whatever creature you're doing, and then this is the time where you want to get out all of those craving resources and have them ready in your inventory, as your creature is going to need them during the process, which is just about to happen after this, which is where your dino is impregnated by the Rhynio. That's when the cravings will happen. Afterwards it will roll over and your creature will die, which, you know, could be a little bit sad, don't read the most important one, and then out comes a baby Rhynio. Now the Griffin is making an appearance on the list, and for good reason, mainly because of that gliding ability, being a prime choice for doing any kind of Wyvern Trench raids on Ragnarok and other maps where these things spawn, which also Wyverns spawn on. And Valguero is no, I don't know actually. Valguero does have the Griffin Trench, but either way, especially on Ragnarok, I should have just stuck to that example. These creatures are very widely used for those Wyvern Trench runs, and for good reason considering their insane gliding speed. And this does have a bit of movement speed on it, by the way. This isn't the actual speed, but this is the early days of B-roll, and this is actually the first piece of B-roll which I ever recorded for the channel, and it's still kicking around today. Actually, there's a nice little memory of when I started doing the top 10s, and there's actually audio attached to this as well, but obviously that has been muted as I'm talking over it with me now, because me about 6 months ago, for some reason I'm ridiculously slow at talking. But also, on top of the Griffin's insane speed, don't know why that's so hard to say, these things are also really great at dealing damage as well, and that glide ability can also inflict damage onto the creatures as well. If you dive bomb them, I think that's what it's called, and you'll see it being used here, and it is actually a pretty useful tactic and a very unpredictable one if you're going up some players in Ark, which, you know, may be somewhat predictable if people know the Griffin, but you can definitely be very sneaky with those glide attacks, and again, very, very great for doing any kind of Wyvern Trench runs. You can get quickly in there and quickly out with no trouble whatsoever. In at number 7, we have the Managarmr, and this creature definitely does have to be put on the Speedy Tames list, and I think for this creature being a Speedy Tame, it definitely does make sense. Like, this creature can absolutely zip across the map, although it does have a slight kind of learning curve to it, so I'm not actually going to put it as high as maybe it could have ranked. And also, I don't know, I'm not really kind of into this creature as much as some of the other creatures, and I don't think that as useful of a speedy creature, which is why some creatures like the Gallimimus I'm just not going to put on this list, partly because there are definitely some faster creatures out there, but I don't really enjoy using them, and the Managarmr is kind of one of those, and considering its bugginess as well, I don't think it is the fastest when you really take everything into comparison, although it definitely is a very speedy tame and worthy of this list. You just might say the creature after it and the one after that is just a little bit slower than it, and maybe you could say that, but over longer distances those creatures are going to hold up a lot better than this thing. This is definitely more of a short burst distancing creature, but also with their freeze ability they are definitely very useful, not just for speed but also for freezing things, which is a surprisingly OP ability actually, considering how long these things freeze other creatures for. The only thing to watch out for is the bugs. Next up we've got the Snow Owl, and this is one of the most revolutionary flyers out there in my opinion, and it is so widely used by every Ark player that has ever set eyes on one of these creatures, and I'm pretty sure they're available on Fjorda as well, not just on Extinction, so you can dig into these creatures even more if you are on any of those maps. Of course, Extinction and Fjorda I think are the only two maps where these things spawn. The reason why I'm mentioning that is Extinction is a paid DLC map and Fjorda is a free one, so it is a lot more accessible, and I know a lot of you down there who watch these videos do actually play Fjorda, so you know it kind of makes sense why I'd mention that. But obviously their main speed does come from that gliding ability, which is very similar to the Griffins, but it always just seems faster and with a lot more agility than the Griffin, and there's kind of a tier list to it, as the next creature is a glider, the next one after that as well is a glider, but with even more speed, and even the creature which is in at number 1 is a glider as well, so there's definitely something to be said for this method of travel. And as well, they do have a sort of heat seeking ability to spy out any people who might be trying to raid your base in a PvP scenario, or any creatures which may be missing in a PvE one. You also want to level up that stamina so you can heal these creatures up so quickly, as obviously that is something which is going to be essential in any kind of boss fight or battle, obviously, because you're going to want to heal up those creatures quickly and efficiently, and you can do it somewhat more efficiently than the Daedon, and especially on Extinction you can actually keep that creature alive, as the Daedon really isn't going to rack up against any of the Titans. But it's also useful if you're taming a creature and its health is really low, Then if it's wild, obviously it's not yours, you can't heal it with a Daedon, but you can heal it with a Snow Owl, which is just a nice little thing as well. And with their pellets on top of that too, these things can gather insane loot out of any kind of gacha, which is definitely something to be said, and something which is a very nice thing to have, which no other Ark creature can offer. And if you do have Extinction or Fjorda, definitely go for the Snow Owl. In at number 5 is the Desmodus, and this creature is yet again another glider along the glider tier list, as this one feels even more fast than the Snow Owl, and with even more agility and some nicer abilities to go on top of that as well. Although the speed is the main thing which we're going to be talking about here, again with that gliding ability, and the fact that the stamina drain is also very minimal as well. Like the Snow Owl, it definitely does benefit these creatures hugely, and I do really enjoy the speed which you can get out of a creature like this. And also the gliding doesn't seem too far off primitiveness, which is always a nice thing to have in Ark, because I don't particularly like all the techie creatures, although the creature in at number 2 is a kind of techie one, but still I kind of prefer the primitiveness of this creature and the kind of Nordicness of it as well. Considering that Fjorda is a very Nordic map, it's a nice quality for this creature to have. And again, with that glide ability, you can get some serious speed out of these things. Next up, we've got the Rock Drake, and yet again another glider, this time packing a lot of punch in terms of the damage department. You should really look at this thing. It deals so much damage in terms of actually, like, its damage to size ratio and damage to speed ratio is frankly stupid in terms of actually just how powerful this creature is. But it really does make it a very useful one, and although not the greatest on maps that aren't Arboretion, it definitely has to be said to be a fast creature, and definitely one of the faster ones in the game, obviously being even above the top 5 in this list that we've got here today, which obviously mean it must be fast. I'm not giving you the best example here considering I'm in quite flat terrain, but the stamina drain is pretty low, so when these things are actually in some proper serious action, they can glide for a long while. And also on top of that, they can grab onto any kind of walls, and also they can kind of zoom onto walls as well, as long as they are close enough to them. And obviously when your HUD is enabled, which it isn't here, just for the sake of the B-roll, you'll get a little crosshair on your screen when obviously you can grapple on to those rock faces. So it's not like you just have to spam click buttons and then as soon as you get close enough, there you go, you can now click on it, but you don't really know when you're close enough. No, it is quite obvious to tell because of that marker. Just for the sake of the B-roll, I've turned the HUD off, so obviously that isn't there. Although it is pretty easy to judge with your eyes as well. Just, you know, a little bit of assistance is nice. And if you haven't already, definitely go and tame yourself the Rock Drake. You'll have an absolute blast with this thing. In at number 3 is the Bloodstalker, the living Spider-Man. This creature definitely is one when it comes to any form of agility, and it really can't be backed down for that skill. And it is one which actually hardly any other, if not any other, spider in Ark possesses, as the Rhynio is one of the most downright useless creatures out there. But it is also really quick and agile on the surface of the water and under the water too, which can't be said to some other creatures on this list. And it definitely is one of the more versatile ones, being used for a wide range of things. And I actually use it mainly underwater, as it is a really viable underwater tame. But obviously with this really fast grappling, it makes it one of the fastest creatures out there, as it can really quickly zip between any kind of tall objects, and it can't just grapple onto trees, it can grapple onto many other things as well. And the range of the limit on what it can grapple to is absolutely insane as well. It's not like you can only grapple onto things which are really close to you. It's probably at least maybe 50 to 100 meters, which is actually a substantial amount, and it could even be more than that. I haven't really measured any of it. And there is a huge benefit to this as well, as you get yourself a really great agile travel mount, but also on Gen 1 there are missions which you'll benefit from for having faster Bloodstalker flying skills. The alpha one of which I have done, as well as the gamma and the beta ones too, but the alpha one obviously does offer the most hexagons, and those are an extremely useful virtual resource on an already virtual game. But you know, doubly virtual, very useful on Gen 1. In at number 2 is the Astrodelphis, but also the Tropignathus. I'm just going to shoehorn them both in together as they kind of move in the exact same way, although the Astrocetus is the kind of main one here, but Tropignathus I'm going to put as a little honorable mention as it is an extremely fast tame as well, and you know, it didn't really make the list in terms of what the B-roll says, but I'm saying it also goes here too. They kind of go hand in hand with each other as they use a fuel which adds to their saddle, and then they can travel at absolutely insane speeds across the map, and it really doesn't seem like it may be traveling this fast at this time. But considering that these things fly consistently and they only stop when they run out of fuel, it's insane over long distances, and it really is a very, very viable one. And considering with the Tropignathus it can gain speed as it points further down, it does have a huge benefit as well, and so can the Astrodelphis increase its speed as well. And on top of that, fire all kinds of lasers like the Tropignathus with all kinds of grenades, and these really are fighting machines of the air, and they have to be pretty much the fastest out there in the game, obviously only beaten by the creature in at number 1. But what actually is that creature? In at number 1 just had to be the Maywing. This creature is one of the fastest, if not the fastest creature in the game, and it kind of has to be considering I'm putting it in at the number 1 spot. Sorry Syntac, the galley just simply doesn't make the cut. But either way, in terms of this thing, it is probably the most efficient glider out there, and with also the fact that its saddle is unlocked at level 19, it really does have something to be said that you can have this so early on in the game, and it is the best travel mount out there in my opinion, and actually the fastest travel mount really out there in my opinion. And you may be able to get a creature which can go faster for a short amount of time, but over long distances these creatures are going to be your biggest friend with absolutely insane traveling speeds, obviously increasing as you shoot further down like the Tropignathus and the Astrodelphis, but I think this is even faster than all of those, and I really do credit its speed, especially considering the level it is unlocked at. And also it does act as a feeding trough as well, which is just a nice little ability to have, and actually it doesn't really do that bad on same elevation terrain, which some other gliders really do struggle with. And obviously it can gather berries too, which is just a nice little bonus which I think we all really need to appreciate. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this one, as I did really enjoy making it. And as always, comment down below what is the fastest art creature in your opinion, and I'll see you all later.